there's a 7-race card at Punchestown where the first went off at 20-1. For OTB Sports Radio, I'm Cathal Mullaney.
OTB Sports Radio. Leaders' Questions with Gilroy and Stuart Lancaster.
In association with Goal.
From Off the Ball.
And you're very welcome along to this week's episode of Leaders' Questions. I'm delighted to say our guest this week is Chris Meyer from Investec. Before we get into this, Stuart, how exactly do you know Chris?
So Investec have obviously had a very big interest in sport and sponsored sport for a variety of different events and different tournaments, and it came through two people really. Obviously Andy Farrell, he was the one who struck up a relationship with Chris first and foremost, but Owen Eastwood, who we had on the last series, Owen also did some work with Investec, and then on the back of that, after the World Cup in 2015, Investec invited me into their senior management team, and Chris was obviously leading that. To pass on what I'd learned from the World Cup, and which I thought was a really progressive step for an organisation. For me, it was a big step, actually, because it was the first time after the World Cup that I'd spoke to anyone, really. It was a private meeting. There was only 14 people there, the senior management team, but it allowed me to open up and share what I learned, and then on the basis of that, I did a little bit of extra work with Investec, passing on what I learned to sort of the broader organisation. So that's how it started, and we've just stayed in connection since.
That's a pretty raw conversation the first time.
Very.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah, they got the warts and all, really. And it was actually, it wasn't therapeutic, but it helped me. The process of doing it made me reflect on everything and write down what I learned and put it in a way that I thought would be relevant for business. Because obviously it was a sporting context, but I was trying to make it relevant so that they could take some learning from it that would benefit their organisation, which is obviously a huge organisation.
Yeah. Chris, good afternoon to you. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Joe. Yeah, very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, that's a really interesting starting off point for us. Why did you ask, after a World Cup which hasn't been successful, why did you ask the coach who presides over it? Because traditionally we hear, you know, after the World Cup in 2003, Clive Woodward goes on a speaking tour, after he's president, Bill Clinton or whatever goes on these tours, but to talk to somebody who has gone through a difficult experience like that must have been pretty interesting, and the decision to do so, that in and of itself is pretty interesting for a bank.
Yeah, I think it probably stems a little bit before that, where, again, through Andy Farrell, I've known a long time, we got to know Stuart, and if you recall, Stuart, you came in about, I think it was about June 2015, and gave us a bit of an overview of your thinking and approach to. Yeah, this is the plan to the world. You know, for the World Cup, this is how we're going to go about it. And you know, what struck me around that, it wasn't actually a conversation about rugby. It was a conversation about people, and it was a conversation about team and the team dynamic and the environment. And it really stuck with me and a few of us. And we also just got a sense of who Stuart is. You know, in my mind, one of the truly most humble and deep-thinking people I've met, and the ability to really think through and reflect. You know, hit us even then at the start. And so when you know, everything happened, and you know, the World Cup went the way it did, we reached out through a mutual friend and said, would you come in and talk to us? Because we believe that you learn the most through difficulty, through failure, and failure isn't you know, the end of the game. It's the start. It's the learning point. So, in fact, Stuart, I've spoken a lot in my team about that dinner for years and years. We talk about it a lot because we actually felt very privileged, if I can say, to be sitting listening to you and learning from you, and just seeing you operate as you know, and the degree of thought that you'd put into things. We went away thinking, wow, you know, there's just so much here that we can take, and so much that you've taken to Leinster, and built your career on ever since. So, you know, that's how we think.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how the discussion about people and planning and performance is the type of thing that works, that has crossover, because so frequently we hear of businesses just using sports jargon, and it's just a shorthand for them to explain things without actually fully understanding that the best sports organisations have, on a weekly basis, to put their ideas up against another organisation that is trying to do exactly the same thing. And so if you're no good over a period of time, you consistently lose. But if you can consistently win over a period of time, it means you're constantly evolving and changing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the World Cup is a standalone event, and you know, in business, I guess, you know, rarely do you get judged on like 20 minutes of work. I think in sport sometimes, you know, a World Cup creates that intensity and scrutiny and that pressure, and a home World Cup, obviously, you know, when that 20 minutes didn't go well, proved terminal for me. Someone made an interesting point to me the other day about Pep Guardiola and how, you know, he doesn't always win the one-off cup ties and win like the equivalent of the FA Cup, but he'll pretty much always win the league because he's got the best team consistently all the time. You know, if you look at his track record now, obviously it's still to be played out this season, but you know, that was very much my mindset as I was coaching England. I wanted to create a long-term, high-performing team with a culture and identity that ran deep through the organisation, from the England senior team right the way through to grassroots rugby and to the England nation, and talk about the sense of identity and all those things that I actually think we went a long way to achieving. You know, I think Twickenham was changed, you know, and there was definitely a sense of connection in the country, not just because of the momentum of the Home World Cup. You know, what I tried to do with Chris and his team was pass on, in the first instance, this is what I inherited, this is how I tried to build it, this is what happened, this is why I think it happened, and this is what I've learned going forward as a leader, you know, personally, that I'll take into my next role, which, as Chris has quite rightly said, has ended up being, ironically, here in Ireland, and you know, Leinster hopefully get the benefit, and I guess indirectly Ireland.
Yeah, Chris, we were chatting about this before, talking to you, just in terms of the creation of a culture in an institution as big as yours, where not everybody is in the dressing room at the end of the day having been through the training session. You need to be able to communicate your ideas and vision at the same time to people in different parts of the world. It's a very difficult thing to do.
It is, and it's something that occupies my mind immensely. And I could maybe tell you a story and connect it to World Cups and sport. You also sort of ask the question, you know, do we use sport seriously, or is it just an easy way to communicate ideas? But for me, I sort of go back about 10 years ago, and I was at that time running one of the businesses within Investec, which was, for all intents and purposes, was a startup. It was our corporate treasury business. And I remember sitting in a room with a group of guys, and which was the starting team, and we tried to set ourselves a few goals and said, you know, what does success look like, and so on. And we quantified that in a financial metric. We said we want to make a certain amount of profits, and off we went. Of course, we had a bit of a plan and so on. But the first year or so was easy. It was this kind of exciting you know, journey that we were all on in the sort of startup mindset. And I didn't really have to think too much about it, motivating people and getting people to really give of their best. It just seemed to happen. But after a while, we hit that target, that financial target. It took us a year, and we said it was a 3-year target. And I quickly realized that new people were coming into the business. We were growing. We weren't a startup. People weren't there at the beginning. We'd sort of gone past that target. I started to think about, so what is it really that we're going to buy into and all be truly excited about and passionate about, and build that will be sustainable. That's not just 1 or 2 years. And that's, for me, is actually the rugby analogy, because at that time I was looking across at rugby. I'm a very passionate rugby fan, and watching the sort of phenomenon of World Cups, of teams sort of winning a World Cup, peaking, getting themselves ready, winning a World Cup, and then disappearing into the so-called rugby abyss. And this cycle of repeated success and then failure. And there are lots of stories of it through the years. And so we were thinking, what is something that's really sustainable, that goes beyond 3 years or 4 years, that you can really own and buy into as a group of people? And we've seen that. We've seen that in terms of what Stuart tries to do. I've seen that with the All Blacks, with meeting people like Owen Eastwood, and we feel we've got something in our organisation that we focus on, which is our culture, that binds people together, that creates an environment that people feel proud of and want to be part of and build and contribute. And we focus on that all the time.
Did you inherit that culture? Did you have to define what that culture was? What was that process of communicating what that culture is so everybody understands, oh yeah, okay, I understand that I'm doing this almost subconsciously, but actually now that I'm aware of it, yeah, happy days.
Our culture, I suppose, is inherited in a sense, but we feel we own it. Our business is largely, actually up until very recently this year, has been a founder-led organization. So we have a story, a strong identity around our founders who built something from nothing, who sort of defied the odds, were a little bit of the underdog, if you like, and had to really go out there and scrap and make it happen and survive. And we had a lot of that, that's in our DNA, and we had a lot of that in our founder story, which has really set the tone over the years. We talk about being an entrepreneurial organization, for example, and we have a lot of entrepreneurial clients, but it comes from the entrepreneurs who founded the place and the people in this organization who are so passionate about building. So no, I didn't inherit it. We didn't have to define it. We inherited it, and we work on it every day. How do you work on it? Because that's the practical things. It's one of the things that we get some feedback from. It's like, okay, give me some practical advice here. When I'm listening to this, I'm kind of getting a bit of an introduction, a diploma. Everybody wants the details to turn it into a PhD. I mean, firstly, I'd say a few things. We're a humble organization. We're humble people, and we don't have all the answers. And so, that probably more than anything else defines us. We do feel a little uncomfortable talking about it too openly because we feel, my grandmother used to say to me, pride comes before a fall. You don't have all the answers. So, but I'll give you a sense of how we think. And actually, I'll tie it back to something Owen Eastwood said to me, which always sticks in my mind. Owen once said to me, context, the environment, is 70% of everything, and we tend to understate that. Our behaviors are very much governed by the context that we're in. So think of being down at the pub or being at a sports game, how you behave, versus being in a boardroom, and dealing with a board and so on. The context really governs. And so we think about that a lot. We think about the environment all the time, and we believe focusing on the collective, focusing on that environment, is probably the most important thing. Too often, you see the focus on the individual. There's a I think common thinking is you need to develop the individual, hire for talent. And really focus on having the most talented people around you, whereas we say focus on the environment, and really build an environment that people feel that they can connect to and be part of, as a starting point. That is really interesting because they're quite different. If you were to ask everybody without thinking too much about it, you would tend to try and get just the best players, but we all know that you can have a team of Galacticos, and if they don't pass the ball to each other, or if one of them is a bit more temperamental than everybody else, then suddenly the team ethic doesn't work. But it can be very tempting to always go for the most talented people.
Yeah, I think taking back to the sort of sporting context, or what I inherited, I definitely selected on character before talent. So if I had a player who was A-grade talent and say B- character, I would go with an A-grade character and a B- player, really. And it was very difficult to start with because obviously you've got to win games in the short term and build for the long term. But I certainly selected on character as well as talent. You can't, obviously, they have to have talent. You can't just pick good guys who are not going to be able to cope with international rugby. But we definitely did that. And, the reality was we wanted to get the culture right before we got the performance, and in the belief that you don't get high performance and tag culture at the end, or you might get it for a short period of time, but it's not sustainable. And what Chris is saying in his world and what I was trying to build at the RFU was that sense of long-term high-performing team, and don't go through the peaks and troughs of World Cups. And something interesting, obviously, that he mentioned there was, the story that creates, Investec's values and culture is based on the founder members of Investec. And, with England, what we tried to do was delve into the history of England rugby, England as a nation, and get the backstory behind where the team came from, some of the strong personalities that played for England during, the early 1900s, through the World Wars, through into, and we created a history wall of all the players that played for England, and, many different ways in which we tried to connect the team to the history to create the sense of identity, which then creates the...
Did it work? Were the players into it?
100%, yeah. 100%. It was we created a film of what it means to be English, and and I think we had it, if you talk about the order of events, so this is 2012, 2013, and then obviously you're still dealing with the day-to-day practicalities of winning rugby games, so you're doing the technical and the tactical, and you're building all that game plan as you evolve, you're selecting players. Interestingly, one of the bits of things I reflected on is that once you've got that cemented, I don't think you need to keep delving back into it all the time. People have got it, but you need to keep tapping into it occasionally and keep reminding them of this is what we're about, this is our backstory, this is our culture, this is our heritage, this is our history. The bit I'm interested in, Chris, and part of the reason I wanted you to come on the show was because I do this in a sporting context, and I have 45 players, and I have management team, and with England, obviously it was bigger, but it was still relatively hands-on for me. When you're dealing with people who are, as Jer said, remote from the organisation, do you go through a process of selling your vision and your culture and your beliefs to your senior management team and allow them to effectively spread the word and spread the gospel and the culture of Investec? Or do you physically feel you need to do it? And if so, how do you then do that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So our business has grown from nothing, from literally we talk about 5 people and 4 chairs back in 1974, and over the years, whenever we have town halls or any form of large group of people, the first question that comes up is, will we be able to protect our culture as we grow? And we got that question when we were 300 people, when we were 1,000 people, 2,000 people. We're 8,000 people, and we get the question every day. And so, I mean, the short answer is no. I can't go out there personally and spread the word, or our founders can't do it. Collectively, we need to do it. We say things like, we're in the business of risk. We take risk, and we can only and risk requires trust, and trust comes with our culture. And so we can only grow our business, we can only take risk at the rate at which we can grow our culture. So the break on business growth for us is the rate at which we can grow our culture. So we attend to it every day. We talk about it in our business. I agree with you. The identity story is there. You can come back to it and tend to it over time. But if you start forgetting or ignoring your values and your standards and all the things that you believe in, you quite quickly the underlying culture starts to erode. So yeah, it's really about I suppose developing a culture that people respect and feel like they're part of, and that sets the tone and the growth for our business going forward.
What about the issue of leadership and making sure that each of your individual teams has strong leadership and that every individual feels a little bit responsible for developing their own leadership talents and skills, but that they're given the freedom to do that? Because we've talked a good bit about, over the course of this series and the last one, about, teams do require certain individuals to rise up at various stages. Pop-up leadership, it was referred to recently in one of our episodes. And I'm just very interested in that concept of making sure that everybody feels like, I can develop as an individual here while at the same time servicing the needs of the team.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, we talk about freedom to operate. One of our values actually is around freedom to operate. It's probably the reason I'm here. There are many people that work for Investec who, never thought they'd be bankers, to be honest. They wanted to just be part of something create and build a business. And freedom to operate is a principle or a value that we hold quite dearly. So think about this. Okay, so management control and freedom to operate are basically inversely proportional. The more control I have, the less freedom somebody has in their business to develop and grow. And so for us, we have this deliberate focus on trying to reduce management control and increase freedom to operate, and giving people the space to think and develop and drive things, because ultimately we think freedom to operate and performance are completely aligned and correlated, and freedom to operate is a big driver of a great performing environment.
It reminds me of Comfortable in Chaos, I have to say.
Yeah. Just, Chris, when things don't go so well, do you as the leader ever take more control, or do you still trust the freedom to operate? If things aren't going well, when you've had tough times, how do you deal with that as a leader?
I think, we've all experienced it. Is in tough times, whoever the leader is often feels like they need to jump in and really, take control or make things happen. Sort of on the rugby field to some extent on the weekend, and so. We try hard not to. I try hard not to do that. I think it's really in those moments that leadership is defined. If you can step back and let the people who really know, who really have the knowledge, make the decisions for themselves, I think you stand in good stead. I was, a vivid memory where in the middle of the financial crisis, it was tough times. I was watching people on desks at other banks losing their jobs. And not once did I feel that the founders of our bank, the leaders at that time, would come in and sort of say, "Don't worry, Chris, step aside. We'll solve this for you." It was about giving people space, and letting the people who know what to do, who are good at their jobs, to get on and do it. But it's difficult.
Yeah, we should explain, just in case anybody's unfamiliar with the Comfortable in Chaos. This is your mantra that players need to be comfortable in chaos. Yeah,
ultimately. As a coach, it's not like it's American football where you can control the game once it starts. So you very much empower the players and give them as much support, education, and belief that you can put in them before the game starts, so that they can deal with the complexity of games as they unfold in any one game or any one season. And at Leinster, what I try and create as many environments and many scenarios during the course of a week to make it almost as chaotic as possible, so that they become comfortable in dealing with different scenarios getting thrown at them. And I think when I first came in, it was very alien to them, because it was a very structured way in which the game was built, and they found it quite uncomfortable to start with. But the more we did it in training, the more we learnt from games, the more adaptable they came, and we could recognise a problem and deal with a problem on the field. Now, in the first year, obviously, we lost in 2 semi-finals, so we didn't certainly have all the answers. But, when we reflect back to the Champions Cup final as an example, we went 12-9 down with about 12 minutes to go. We drew back to 12-all on 73 minutes, and we got the winning penalty on 78 minutes, 30 seconds. So we won, and then he had a drop goal at the final play to draw. So, but that was the real evolution of the group at the time, that they could deal with such intensity and such pressure and still deliver in the moments. And I think if you can create that in an organisation, outside of sport, then I really think you're onto something.
It's not a million miles away from freedom to operate when you think about it.
No, it has to be. Well, you have to give them freedom to operate, because you literally cannot do anything else. You can't go on the field and make the decisions. You can't say, call this line out or run this play. So being a rugby coach, it's a very unnerving feeling when you're in control and responsible for everything, but actually you can't do anything once the game starts.
Was that always your philosophy?
Yeah, no, it always has been. Even with England in the pressure points of the Six Nations. We've just been through Six Nations, and you're always trying to empower and grow. And one of the challenges with England in particular was that the leadership group, as started in 2012, was that they were so young. They were talking about 20, 21-year-old players who, You know, it's like Chris having his senior management team who are all mid-20s. You know, you tend to gravitate to senior management positions because you get more experience, you learn through success and failure. But in rugby, you know, we're constantly trying to evolve that in our young players. But typically the teams that do the best have that balance between senior players and young leaders at the same time.
Chris, in terms of just the freedom to operate, to tease this out a little bit, if you talk about it all the time and you're asking your senior management team not to intervene when everybody, it's kind of like be more of a guiding hand there, how do people actually get better themselves? Is it a bit of learning through trial and error and then having kind of constant review and saying, okay, well, would you make the same decision now that you made yesterday, knowing all the things you know today?
So I think, you know, one of the biggest obstacles to, I suppose, freedom to operate effectively is the fear of failure. And, you know, all too often people are worried if I have that freedom to operate and I, you know, make a call or go in a particular direction and I get it wrong, then what's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? And so that's something else that we have to look at and focus on. And we talk about, you know, collective ownership. We talk about, you know, not having a culture of blame. And so that if we do make a mistake, we make it together, and we learn from it. And so that people are brave enough to try things. I mean, again, we're a banking organization. Risk is what we're about, so we need to be careful. But ultimately, we want people to learn, and the way you learn is actually by trying things. And that's what we really need to focus on in terms of giving people that space.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the involvement that the company has with sport, and so obviously most people understand the sponsorship model. A brand gets associated with a very powerful sports tournament or a team, and there's a reflected halo. It's kind of an old model, and I suspect a bank as new and progressive as yours wasn't really just interested in badge and tag exercises when it came to your sports sponsorships. What do you feel as a company that you're taking from the sports and benefiting from them?
I mean, there are a few things. I mean, firstly, you know, it's a young, dynamic, you know, context. Sport is about energy and passion. It's about winning. You know, we want to win. We want our clients to win. And we have, you know, healthy, active people in our organization who are passionate about different sports as much as our clients do. So there's some very simple things. I don't think we approach sport as a branding exercise or a sponsorship exercise. We think about it more as a partnership and a link to who we are and to some of our values. And you can see it, I think, in terms of how we've got into certain things. For example, GB women's hockey. For us, that goes way beyond a team playing, you know, hockey in the Olympics or whatever it is. It's about getting to know the individuals, and we've learned a hell of a lot from them, and you know, are quite passionate about our partnership. So yeah, it's not a branding thing at all. How do
you benefit then? Like, because that was what I was kind of really interested in hearing. How do you actually, as a corporate entity, take access to a team like a hockey team, for example, and then go, okay, we actually need to learn a little bit from this. Look at what these people are doing with their lives, because I can certainly see the benefit of, you know, even our hockey team reached the World Cup final last year, and they're an amazing group of women, and we knew nothing about them before that. And then afterwards, it was like, actually, everybody could learn a little bit from the dedication to their craft that these women have shown. But I'm just not sure how companies can actually expose themselves to that in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so I mean, in different ways, we build relationships with the team, with a particular team. We invite them into our organization. We get to know them. We ask them to run their teams, how they build for, you know, for whatever it is that they're focusing on. So we learn from them in a similar way to getting to know Stuart. We've hired people out of sport and brought them into our organization because we've seen, again, you know, this high-performing mindset and this reliance on the team, putting the team ahead of the individual, is something that all great world-class sports teams, I think, have. So we try to take these learnings, and by bringing people from that background, that context into our organization, it helps almost accelerate the process.
Yeah, have you found that there are many transferable lessons from sport into business from the business people you've spoken to?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that it works both ways. So when I get asked to do a talk, to an Investec, or I'll always try and do it if it's possible, because you take as much learning as you give. I'm actually interested in the leadership of the leader. The leadership journey of the leader, what they learned, how they've got to that leadership position, what the challenges they face, how they deal with the loneliness of being the number one, and maybe there's some of the questions for you, Chris. How have you found, gravitating? Have you always been gravitated to leadership positions, and how have you found it? Enjoyable or tough, or how do you describe it?
I've enjoyed it, but it's been a learning thing, Stuart. I've had to really evolve and mature over the years. I think if you think about what it is you want to achieve today, or what I want to achieve today versus 5-10 years ago, they're so very different. In the early days, I didn't think a lot about the team around me, and I was just an individual trying to do this best as I could. But there's a point in time when you realize that it's not about the individual, it's about the collective. You start really focusing on, as I said, building that environment. And it's difficult because there are times when you're on your own. There are times when you've got to make some tough calls. You want to be close to and be friendly with everybody. You're in this together. There's a tremendous bond, but not every decision's an easy one. Most of them are difficult, so it can become quite lonely. But that's how I've approached it. I look across at sports, and you guys, you can see the results more quickly. You get to the end of the game, if you've won or lost. You get to the end of the season, and so on. It's all out there. For us, in some ways, it's I don't know if it's more difficult, but it's different in that the scores aren't on the doors. The scores really, yes, you can look at the financial statements and see how much money you're making or not, but really the scores are what's in your culture. It's what your people are doing every single day. Have you built something that really is sustainable and an incredible environment to be part of? And you don't see that every day. You see that over a much longer period of time. It takes years to really see, where you are on that spectrum.
How do you sense check that, Chris, along the way? How do you make sure that you're doing the right thing?
Dialogue. We talk to people. We try and stay connected as a group of people. We talk to our clients. We talk to each other in the business. Try and get a sense of where we are. We obviously do have all the other targets and goals within the business, so we can see if we're achieving our financial targets. But it's really about communicating and staying connected.
Again, just to go back to that question from Stuart, how do you learn this? How do you acquire this as you go? Like, is there somebody in the background? Was there a mentorship that you particularly benefited from along the way?
Yeah, so I think life has been a series of mentorship for me anyway. Meeting people, some formal, some informal, and trying to learn and looking for those points of guidance and benchmark and so on. So, from early on, I had people in the business who I could always turn to and look for advice and help. We talk about trusting the culture. If you can really trust the culture, if you can trust that people are going to give you, the best advice and be there to help you, it really sets you on that learning path. And then, more recently, reaching out to people like our mutual friend Owen. He's been fantastic in sense. We have a I suppose a function within Investec called Organizational Development, OD, and a group of people in the business with us who are we call them the mirror. They're there to help us look in the mirror and make sure that we are I suppose thinking about the right things, doing the right things, and they help us navigate.
Are there external people you can talk to? Because obviously banking is by its nature necessarily quite secretive, so it's not like you can kind of just randomly talk to strangers about the challenges your industry is facing. But were there people outside of your industry, as you developed into somebody with a senior role, who you can kind of say, look, here's a situation that I'm not quite sure of?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, the people like Owen Eastwood are people I've spoken to outside Investec, and obviously it's very useful to get that outside context. I don't sit and talk to Owen about banking and risk and capital and so on. I talk to him about people and situations and teams, and so yes, we all are looking for those outside points of reference. But Stuart, I don't know. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I've learned a lot from you. In just your ability to really assess a team and reflect on your role in the team and so on. I take a lot of that back into our environment. So we're always learning.
It was interesting when I went to Investec and that OD part of the organisation. I was like, I've never heard of it. They existed, and they are the cultural. The people who sit in the organisation who are looking after the culture and how feeding back and creating leaders. And it was fascinating. Chris, would other companies have a similar department, or is it pretty unique to Investec, do you think?
I think it's pretty unique in the way we do it. There are different forms of it. People, some organisations I've seen do use outside coaches or so on to play the role. But I think we're quite unique in terms of having an in-house embedded function in-house the way we do it. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same in teams in that often people bring an outside psychologist in or an outside. Right, we're going to do some work on culture, and these culture consultants are going to come in. But there's nothing beats an embedded either psychologist or people in the organisation who are responsible for those sorts of things, because they're living it, breathing it on a day-to-day basis. And certainly in the teams I've worked with where it's been successful, the people responsible for that, it's embedded. But what really, I believe, is that what really makes the difference is that the leader understands it. And if the leader understands what good culture looks like, what good identity looks like, and how to build it and drive it and create it and sustain it, then I think an organisation will go a long way to being successful. If the person at the top of the organisation is maybe very good at the technical, tactical aspects of, let's call it, the technical side of banking, and they've gravitated through to the top because they understand the mechanisms of the job, but they have no empathy or emotional intelligence or understanding how to build or sustain a culture, then usually it fails.
Yeah, because everybody can meet a short-term target. It's whether or not you can do it the next year. The sustainability of the whole thing, which Chris spoke about very eloquently at the start of all this. Chris, I think people will recognise from your accent that you're South African. I've got to ask you, how are you going to feel when Ireland beat South Africa in the quarter-final of the Rugby World Cup this year?
You'll be playing New Zealand.
That's the correct answer. Well done.
No, I would say in all seriousness, I'm a rugby fan, but Irish rugby, I've been so impressed, and you guys must be incredibly proud of the team. And Stuart, again, I think you underestimate your own role in that. Leinster and the spirit that you guys have there, just fantastic. So, we rugby fans first and foremost, and it's just brilliant to see it.
I think Rassie Erasmus is definitely somebody who had a massive impact in his very short time in Munster. And you talk to any of the players he played under him, they were pretty heartbroken when he left, just because it meant that there was no continuity. But at least there was continuity in that he kind of handpicked his successor. He has been somebody who understands the importance of culture, and you can see the impact that that's making with the South African team almost instantaneously.
Yes, I mean, I don't know Rassie personally. I speak to some of the players, and certainly just seeing what he did for Munster and the galvanising effect he's had on, coming back and helping the Springboks has been fantastic. So, South Africa struggles with resources, so to get a guy like Rassie back there is brilliant. We need him.
Well, Chris, enjoy the rest of it. Thanks so much. Best of luck with everything. Cheers for being so generous with your time.
Pleasure. Absolutely. I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks.
Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers.
It's Chris Meyer there from Investec. I hope people benefited and see the crossover or the bits that don't cross over, but it certainly seems that if you get some things right in any team environment, then you give people the freedom to, in this case, to operate, but to succeed and just to be themselves and ultimately get better.
I think it's for Chris. He certainly has benefited from his journey to become the number one in the organisation, a big, organisation. But he spends all his time now thinking about culture and leadership and how he builds the best environment for the people who work there. And having been there and been involved a little bit on the outside of the organisation and once or twice on the inside, they do an unbelievable job. People genuinely feel valued and part of the organisation. And I think he deserves great credit for that. I don't think it's happened by chance, things, because he's one of the few people I've met in business who really gets the sort of leadership piece.
Good stuff. That's another episode of Leaders' Questions with Stuart Lancaster in the book. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
Leaders' Questions with Gilroy and Stuart Lancaster.
In association with Goal.
From Off the Ball. OTB Sports Radio.
Now then.